Chapter 5, of course, is on sexual identity, behavior, and relationships. Um, the chapter starts off in an interesting way, um, talking about historical views of masturbation and menstrual periods. Uh, Not only does it catch your eye right away, but more importantly, it's a discussion about how attitudes and beliefs about one's sexuality have changed over the last century or so. So we can discuss that as we do in class. And of course, that this chapter, because it's covered in a marriage and family class, is the interconnection between our biology and our culture. That's where sex and gender as topics meet together. Intersex people, while rare, are individuals that are born with both genitalia, often putting the parents of the newborn in a situation where they have to make a decision. Hopefully it's the right decision for that person. Transgendered individuals are people who feel comfortable, if not more so, in expressing their gender traits associated with the other sex. And of course, this is a very current and hot topic in our culture today. IVCC recently moved to putting transgender bathroom signage on all the bathrooms in the academic buildings. A very controversial issue nonetheless. There are also individuals who are transsexual. That is, they undergo sex reassignment surgery and hormone treatments. A very interesting phenomenon and one that the American Psychiatric Association has grappled with for years. And of course, sexual orientation is the sexual or romantic pattern of choice. So you can be either homosexual or heterosexual or some variation of that. Heterosexual are people who are attracted and have preferences for individuals of the opposite sex, whereas homosexuals and bisexuals differ. Homosexuals having attraction and preference for relationships with members of their own sex, whereas bisexual individuals tend to be attracted to both males and females. An age-old question is what determines sexual orientation, and the research on this is equivocal. Some supporting biological theories, some supporting cultural theories. One thing that's certain, though, is that attitudes toward gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered individuals has changed over the past 10 to 20 years. But there still remains within culture a condition called homophobia, where a person has very negative, strong feelings toward homosexuals. And an interesting discussion point would be, why would that be? Maybe we can stop the tape and think about that for a while. If you look over the last 12 years, attitudes about whether morality in homosexual relationships have changed pretty dramatically. The red line indicating morally unacceptable, and that's gone down, whereas morally acceptable has gone up, if slightly. It could be a generational thing. It could be less homophobic behavior. It would be interesting, if possible, to extend the curve backwards, but I'm not sure. I suspect that the attitudes would be even higher 10, 20, 30 years ago. You can make a diagram up with the different possible combinations of sex, gender, and sexual orientation. One of the things that sociologists are interested in are sexual scripts. That is, the norms or rules regarding sexual behavior. And of course, the scripts that we follow in terms of what we do are dictated by the culture that we live in, the interpersonal communication between ourselves and our partner, and of course, your own personal views that can be formed early in life by the family that you grew up in. So, families within a culture and between cultures often differ in the types of sexual scripts that they have, and they vary over time as well. These in with this double standard for women is some misunderstandings of what men and women find pleasurable, especially women. Men have different ideas about that than women do. See the difference between men and women's uh, preferences and activities. Some of the early pioneers in human sexuality included Masters and Johnson, and of course Alfred Kinsey. This field of human sexuality has burgeoned into not only a commercial industry but also a very active medical and scientific field of study. It's a very multidisciplinary approach that includes physicians, researchers, educators, and it's taken on different meaning, especially in Western cultures. It's interesting, if not amusing, to look at some of the percentages of what Americans are up to. Um, there are different types of sexual behaviors that are listed not only on the list but in the text, including oral stimulation, oral sex, fellatio, um, and everyone has different likes and dislikes. And of course, this is part of different scripts for different people. Interestingly, um, statisticians have looked at the number of partners that women have and men have over their lifetimes, with an average overall of about 13 partners, 20 for men, 6 for women. When you think about that and think about the people you know and your own sexual behavior, does this even reflect reality? I suspect it's a lot lower than average, than they list as average. With the median, of course, at the 50th percentile being 5, 8 for men and 3 for women. Interestingly, would be interesting to note whether or not this has changed over the last century. So expressions of sexuality change over the lifespan. Early childhood includes developing an understanding of what gender roles and gender behavior are. By middle childhood, there's experimenting with masturbation and touching. And by adolescence, at least on a physical level, children are sexually more mature. Of course, this chart, 2011, reflects teenage sexual behavior in high school. And by ethnic group. One of the things that you notice is that birth rates for women ages 15 to 19 by ethnicity over the years has gone down. I wonder if you could come up with some reasons that the birth rate between 1991 and 2011, that is a 20-year span of time, have actually decreased. I suspect much of it's due to the availability of birth control and agencies like Planned Parenthood. One of the things that's interesting about teenage behavior is pregnancy. Teenage pregnancy is down, but teenage sexuality is not. Non-marital sex among young people includes hooking up, which is sexual interactions without commitment or even affection toward one another. This term's only been more used more recently. One might wonder about gay and lesbian sexual relationships. Are they as monogamous or heterogeneous as or polygamous as heterosexual relationships? And in fact, they're fairly similar, with, of course, the layer of discrimination laid on top of that. Sex in marriage changes over the years. Of course, when a couple's young and their 20s or 30s, it's different than couples in their 70s and 80s. Something that's very common in every culture are extramarital relationships. Including sex with someone who's not your spouse. Some cultures, some Asian cultures, extramarital sex is very common, if not acceptable. And of course, believe it or not, even elderly people have sexual behavior. It may not be the same as a newlywed, but it can be satisfying for the elderly couple. And you can tell from the chart that, of course, sexual behavior is much higher in 25 to 29-year-olds than it is in 60 to 69-year-olds. And of course, vaginal sex decreases for both men and women as one ages. So sexual satisfaction in committed relationships varies from one partner to the other. Men are more likely to feel that when the sex is poor, the relationship is poor, whereas women are more likely to feel that a relationship can still be good even if the sex life is not good. Some issues that arise because of sex as a social problem include the transmission of STIs, or sexually transmitted infections, including obviously HIV and AIDS, but also including problems like genital HPV, which can cause lifelong problems. One rarely hears anymore about how the kind of impairment that in the 1980s occurred with HIV infections. Some interesting little side notes is that certain types of STIs are very common among elderly people, like gonorrhea. But most of these are easily treated with early detection and therapies from a doctor. For males, HIV is most commonly caused by male-to-male contact. For women, it's heterosexual contact with someone who's infected. Drug use for women as a source of HIV infections is much higher, almost twice as high, or over twice as high as it is for men. One of the problems, especially in polygamous cultures, is that when a husband is infected and has many wives, that it leads to outbreaks of AIDS, and it's seen quite prominently in sub-Saharan Africa. When we took a trip to Uganda back in 2012, we met many orphan children whose parents, their mothers and fathers, had died from AIDS, and in fact orphaned many families. But they don't have the same treatment modalities that we do in Western culture. Basically, there is no treatment for people with HIV infections in third world countries.